Every architect wants to be able to do a house, right? That's one reason why we become architects. And you want to do a thoughtful house. It really feels like you're doing something that has a larger life beyond itself. One of the things that I was always attracted by were these really cool designs of really small houses, narrow houses, in really extreme conditions. Like you'll see them in Tokyo, they'll be like a 6-foot wide house. So the question becomes, is that possible in other places? And what it turns out to be, it's really possible, and it's actually financially more viable because these leftover lots tend to be really hard to work on because they have overlapping zoning codes. Which make them hard to build, but they've always been intended to have a house. I actually think the best designs come from constraints. The worst thing for me is if I get a half an acre lot and zoning is well far back and I can put whatever I want on it. Because it's really hard to figure out what should be the main reason for the house. Is it matching my neighbors? Is it to make a statement? It becomes really free, but it becomes really hard because it's hard to make a good decision. Architects are always faced with this question of, do I do something that might be more avant-garde and more progressive, or do you try to work within the spirit of what you think the neighborhood's trying to get to? In this case, unlike the first house, we thought it was more important to be respectful of what the neighborhood had asked for. So here's an actually interesting design choice, right? There are awards and certifications that encourage us to do the right thing, right? They tend to do the right thing, but they also suffer from trying to create one size fits all. There is a certification I could have got for this house that talks about being all electric and not using any carbon, but I failed that because I have this wood burning stove, and people would say, well, why do you do that? You're kind of violating a rule. Well, it's a sacrifice I made for resilience. I thought resilience in this case was probably worth a little bit more than being able to say this is all electric. In Atlanta, we can build 3-story houses. If you can get solar panels up to the 3rd story, there's very few restrictions or things that would be covering the panel. And being an east-west house, this brings me to the story of why the house's roof is asymmetrical. This angle, the long angle, is set to the most efficient fixed solar panel designed for the latitude of Atlanta. When you start walking through this house, you start realizing, oh, it works really well because a lot of these spaces are dual use. They don't have to be the things that I say it needs to be. It can be what the person says it needs to be. So for instance, that big, really nice space at top, right? For those where a primary bedroom is important, they can make it that way. For those where another space for entertaining, they can make it that way. There's going to be a time where we're going to have to build more housing. And we're going to have to build houses anyways. Why don't we build them in a way that serves us better and prepares us for the future? Even though it's the same, it's a decision you have to make anyways. One of the things I really like about doing these kinds of houses is that, it may not seem really extravagant, but it does say something about how we might want to build in the future. And developers and everyone building houses every day have to make these choices. And the hope is if they see an example, and if we're fortunate that this house is successful, it's just an example of like what we can do. And this is something I really feel good about. It's talking a little bit about what we can do a little bit better in the future. We're not, we're not changing everything, but we're doing choices that we know are correct and helpful. And I'm trying to let other people know it's not that hard to do.